Greetings, friends and brethren. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God. And today I want to talk about the priority of Philadelphian gospel proclamation. What is the work that the most faithful Christians should be supporting now in the 21st century? If we go to Revelation chapter 3, starting in verse 7, I want to read some of the words of Jesus. Now this will be from the New King James Version, and much of what I'll be speaking, at least from Scripture, will be from that translation as well. Anyway, starting in verse 7 of Revelation 3, Jesus said, "And to the angel, or the messenger, of the church in Philadelphia write, These things says he who is holy, he who is true, he who has the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens." Jesus says to the Philadelphians, verse 8, "I know your works." Now he says that to the other churches, but this one is positive. Some of the others have been so positive. So Jesus says, "See, I set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. For you have a little strength, have kept my word, and have not denied my name." Today, talk a little bit about what this open door has to do with and the focus in terms of gospel proclamation. What's an open door for? Well, to proclaim the gospel. Now, the late Herbert W. Armstrong understood that the door was opened to proclaim the gospel. So I'm going to read something that he wrote in A Mystery of the Ages. "Also, a door was to be opened for this leader and or the Philadelphia era of the church to fulfill Matthew 24:14. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then the end shall come." He and his church did reach people with the message in many languages. For his first mass media appearance, he started off as a guest on a small radio station. Then he ended up doing a lot of radio. Now, before I mention that again, what I would like to say is, you say, well, that was Herbert Armstrong's understanding of what the open door was. Is that true? Well, certainly it was true. Why do we say this? Because others in the New Testament wrote about open doors as well. If you want to go to Corinthians, go to 1 Corinthians chapter 16. 1 Corinthians 16, starting in verse 8, Paul said, I will tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a great and effective door has been opened to me. So it's a door for him to preach. You say, how do you know that's got to do possibly with preaching? Well, if you went to 1 Corinthians 16, go over a few pages into 2 Corinthians chapter 2. Because in verse 12, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Furthermore, when I came to Troas to preach Christ's gospel, and a door was opened to me by the Lord." So we see open door, preaching the gospel. Now let's go to Colossians chapter 4. Something else the Apostle Paul wrote. We can read about here, starting in verse 2. Paul wrote, "Continue earnestly in prayer, being vigilant in it with thanksgiving. Meanwhile, praying also for us." Praying, here's what you're supposed to pray for. "That God would open to us a door for the word to speak the mystery of Christ, for which I am also in chains, that I also may make it manifest as I ought to speak." I wasn't going to go there, but because he mentioned the mystery of Christ, we've got a booklet, Proof Jesus is Messiah. Let's see if I have here to hold it up. It's available at ccog.org. There it is. Okay, this goes into various scriptures from the Old Testament and New Testament, which prove Jesus was the Messiah. Now, Paul mentioned the mystery of Christ, and we have another booklet. This one's called The Mystery of God's Plan. Why did God create anything? Why did God make you? These books and any other book I hold up, available free online at ccog.org. Go to the Literature tab, click under Books and Booklets. You'll see the covers. You can click on them. You can read the literature. Check it out with your Bible. And by the way, we don't ask for your email address, we don't ask for money, there's no cost or obligation or anything like that. So anyway, Paul was talking about the mystery of Christ, and again, that one book goes into various mysteries. Now, Paul wasn't the only one who talked about the open door. Again, Jesus did in Revelation, but Luke did in the book of Acts, chapter 14. Luke is the one who we believe wrote the book of Acts. And in verse 27, Luke wrote, "Now when they had come and gathered the church together, they reported all that God had done with them, and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles." So it was opening the door of faith to the Gentiles. The Bible's quite clear that the open doors proclaim the gospel, and that the Gentiles were an important part of it. Now I mentioned before, when Herbert Armstrong started out somewhat, ended up going on his own. He started off as a radio guest. And in the Continuing Church of God, we've done a lot of radio. I initially started out in the Continuing Church of God as a radio guest myself, and I did over 140 interviews. And we also, on mostly secular radio programs, we also had our Bible News Prophecy program, and initially it was online. But now we're on AM and FM radio stations in North America, Europe, Africa, and in the Philippines. Now we're also on 2 shortwave stations which reach most of North America, all of Europe, most of the Middle East, parts of Northern Africa, and parts of Far East Asia. In the United States, we are on a dozen AM and FM stations covering many parts of the U.S. In the Philippines, we're on commercial radio. Same thing with Kenya. Also in Ghana, we're on the radio there. And in Europe, we're on European Gospel Radio. As far as I am aware, the Continuing Church of God has actually more radio coverage right now than any other Church of God that I'm aware of. Now, as far as reaching all nations, we want to do that in languages that they'll understand. And we actually have a booklet, The Gospel of the Kingdom of God, which is in English. And we've had this translated into hundreds of languages. And we aren't finished. To the best of my knowledge, never before in the history of the Church of God has church literature been published in as many languages as we've been doing or getting done. As a matter of fact, in this current month, we've had 80 additional languages that we received translations for. And I expect that we'll probably get another 100 or so languages this year, maybe even more. We're serious about having the information in more languages. Why? Well, if you go into the Bible, if you go into the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 7, we read some things about languages. Revelation 7, starting in verse 9, says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all the nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues." Now, how is this going to happen if people don't understand anything? Most people in the world do not understand English. And while many people who are being called by God do understand English, the scripture doesn't say only the ones who understood the English language. No, it says all nations, there's multiple languages, many nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes with palm branches to their hands. And so we see in Scripture, it is necessary to try to reach people in various languages because many are going to respond from those different languages. And again, we have this booklet, The Gospel of the Kingdom of God, translated into hundreds of languages and are continuing to do so. Why? Because there's a priority for the Philadelphians to proclaim the gospel. Herbert Armstrong referred to Matthew 24:14. He said the gospel of the kingdom will be to preach to the world as a witness, and then the end will come. Well, to preach to the world as a witness, we want to do it more than just in the English language. And as I said, to the best of my knowledge, no other time in history has Church of God literature been translated in as many languages as what we have done in the continuing Church of God. And as I say, I think that we're also probably currently have more radio than anyone else. But I realize there's others that are out doing some things, and they're doing television and whatever. Now, the continuing Church of God believes its top priority needs to be to complete the work of Matthew 24:14, Matthew 28:19 and 20, as well as prepare for the short work that is talked about in Romans 9, as well as to facilitate the full number of Gentiles coming in, which is discussed in Romans 11:25. Now, to answer the question, just what is the work, the late Pastor General of the old Worldwide Church of God, Herbert Armstrong, wrote, "But Christ said to his Philadelphia era church that because you have but a little strength, he would open those doors to us." He also wrote, "The purpose for which Christ built the church exemplifies its work. 1, to announce to the world for its witness the coming kingdom of God." And again, we're doing that here. 2, to prepare the people whom God adds to this church. God always worked with humans. He has worked with one man at a time. The work consists of proclaiming the gospel by radio, by television, and in print. And in print, we've got lots of literature. I've held up some of our booklets. Radio, I've mentioned the different stations that we're on. As far as television goes, we're on internet television around the world on multiple platforms, and multiple platforms or channels, if you want to call it that. We've had some television presence also in Ghana. So we are doing the types of things that Herbert Armstrong said was supposed to be done. And his comment about working through one man at a time, we believe in biblical hierarchical governance, as Herbert Armstrong did as well. And many of the groups out there don't really believe in that. Continuing, Herbert Armstrong wrote, "Now God has always worked through one man as leader, but that man is only a leader, and it's also been God. For example, when Samuel was a prophet leading the people of God, they didn't want Samuel anymore. They wanted a human king like the other nations. God said, 'It isn't you they've rejected, Samuel. You weren't the real ruler, I was. They rejected me, that I should not rule over them.'" And Herbert Armstrong said that was a paraphrase of 1 Samuel 8, verse 7. And you can see this, that he said in the 8th chapter of Samuel, you see it was God ruling over them, not Samuel. So it's really Christ leading the church today. It's not I. I'm only an instrument. But if Christ is not in me and leading me and inspiring me, then I'm not the leader. Okay. Now, many others since Herbert Armstrong died, however, said that the top priority is to feed the flock, or that Herbert Armstrong completely finished the work to preach the gospel, which is right. Well, consider the Apostle Paul, I'll read from the Old King James, 1 Thessalonians 5:21 said, "Prove all things, hold fast that which is good." Now, those who proved to themselves that the old Worldwide Church of God best represented the Philadelphia era of the Church of God, whether they were part of it or through the history agreed with it, they should realize that the most faithful remnant would have the same priorities that it claimed and that Jesus taught it should have. Now, although the world's churches teach otherwise, the Old Testament experiences are helpful for those who are near the time of the end. For example, Paul wrote about this in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. Talking about ancient Israel. It says, now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Now, one of the works in the Old Testament was the building of a couple of temples. The first temple was basically a headquarters work. David saw a need and he wanted to build a temple to God. What was prevented by God from doing so? 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verses 2 to 3. But David collected building materials for it from the wealth of Israel. 1 Chronicles 28, 14 and 19. Though his son Solomon built it, 1 Kings 6, 2. And it was magnificent and completely covered with gold, according to 1 Kings 6, 19 for 22. Now the temple might be analogous to the ability of the Worldwide Church of God under Herbert Armstrong to get the gospel out. The first temple was wealthy. The old Worldwide Church of God had fancy buildings, great television presence, great radio presence, etc. But consider that the second temple was different. In Ezra chapter 1, first couple of verses, you see there was a call to find out which of the children of Israel would be faithful to help do the work of rebuilding the temple. And in verse 5 it said, those whose spirit God moved among the people went to do the work. So that suggests not all of God's people responded. And thirdly, the temple that they ended up building was not as impressive as the first one. When the foundations of the second temple were laid, those who saw the magnificence of the first temple didn't rejoice, but they wept. And this kind of reminds me of what's going on today. There's a bunch of people that basically say, if your church or this church or that church really look like the old Worldwide Church of God, I know that's the one God is blessing and therefore I'd go with it. But they're overlooking what happened in the Old Testament. There were two temples. A wealthy one and one that wasn't so wealthy. But they were both God's temple. Now, there was a lull in the construction of the second temple due to opposition. And even though King Darius the Mede eliminated the official opposition and admonished the people to be diligent to build the temple, they were not. And in Haggai 1 verse 2, we hear this people says, the time has not come, the time that the Lord's house should be built. And there are people out there saying, this is not the time to proclaim the gospel. We need to take care of ourselves. Or, as long as we're being taken care of, to some degree, we'll have some token effort to get the gospel out. Because really that's what God wants. Many didn't feel they needed to do the work of God back then, but what did God think? If you went over to Haggai, again I read verse 2, chapter 1. We're going to go to verses 3 and 4. Then the word of the Lord came to Haggai, saying, is it time for you yourselves to dwell in paneled houses, and this temple lie in ruins? So God's saying, look, you think the time is for you to be comfortable, but not support the end time work, or the work at that time. Now God felt that they should do the work first, and then worry about being taken care of later. You can read down this in verses 9 and 10. You looked for much, but indeed it came to little. And when you brought it home, I blew it away. Why? Says the Lord of hosts, eternal, the Yahweh of hosts. Because my house is in ruins, while every one of you runs to his own house. This has happened in modern times. At the beginning of the Philadelphia era, the old Radio Church of God, people were scattered. They never really got to see a minister, couldn't really go to church. Some, except for the Feast of Tabernacles, there were some radio things they could listen to, but it wasn't a church service. And they endured that. Nowadays, people are like, okay, if there's not a church within a reasonable drive of where I live, I'm not going to support the church because obviously that's not the church God wants me to be part of. People have had their priorities backwards. This happened in Old Testament times. It's happened in New Testament times. The late evangelist Carl McNair said that there were different church eras, if you will, in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. And we're seeing the same kind of thing here. We're seeing the mindset of the Laodiceans, who, by the way, Jesus condemns because they don't have the right work. They're lukewarm. They want to take care of themselves. They think they're fine. But they don't have the right priority on doing the work of God correctly. One group doing at least part of it deceitfully, but people seem to think that they're doing the work, and that's simply not the case. Anyway, I believe that the Second Temple may be analogous for the need to do the work of proclaiming the gospel to the world as a witness after dismantling the prior efforts, because that's what happened. As many of you heard me say, I believe that when Herbert W. Armstrong died in January of 1986, that was the end of the Philadelphian era dominance. There were still some Philadelphians, but the dominance was over, and the Laodiceans started to become dominant. And then there was a time of transition, and now this is time for the final phase of the work. But it reminds me again of what most people are doing now, most Christians are doing, is they may not say it, although some do. But what the people said in Haggai 1 verse 2 is the time has not come to go out and do all this, and the answer is they're wrong. It is the time. Now, many have said since the churches of God, and not just the CCOG but the other ones, don't have the same impact as Herbert Armstrong, that the work isn't necessary, but its relative impact isn't the point. The point is God at all times wants his people to do the work and not primarily look after themselves. And by the way, the word Philadelphian, by definition, means love the brethren. That means love of others, not just yourself. Whereas Laodicea means, by the way, the people decide and the people judge, or the judgment of the people. And the judgment of most end-time Christians is wrong. If you believe in the concept of church eras, which means there was a particular attitude that was dominant 7 times throughout the church age, starting with Ephesus, then going to Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicean, that the bulk of end-time Christians, therefore, would be Laodicean and judge against doing the right work. If you read what Jesus says to the Laodiceans, he condemns them for their work being lukewarm. Now, many, in order to justify not doing the proclamation work, have brought up various arguments about Herbert Armstrong. One argument that someone told me was that Joe Tkach Sr. supposedly said Herbert Armstrong said since Herbert Armstrong had fulfilled Matthew 24:14, he didn't need to do that. Well, first of all, it doesn't matter what Joe Tkach Sr. said. He became apostate. And secondly, that's not the case. He thought he was still supposed to do the work. As a matter of fact, Tkach in February of 1989, this is letter 61, said, talks about the 1,335 days. He says, no one knows the time of Christ's coming. And when we don't know the exact time 1335 days begin. However, at that time, the organized efforts of God's work to proclaim the gospel of the world will end. So even though some said Tkach said something otherwise, supposedly he was told that by Herbert Armstrong, that's not what he said. Then as far as Herbert Armstrong himself, he was pretty clear. Back in 1980, he said, our work in the hands of Christ is not yet finished. He will not allow the work to stop until it's finished. Talking about the 1,335 days, we don't know the exact hour. We probably will not know it until it begins. But apparently that is the time when our work shall end and the United Europe will appear. Well, the 1,335 days have not begun, so it's not over. I'm going to quote a lot from Herbert Armstrong because, again, there are people who have had some connection, directly or indirectly, with the old worldwide Church of God, and point to him as proof. What I just said from 1980, Herbert Armstrong also said in 1979, and he also says 1980. Oh, by the way, when did Herbert Armstrong say the church age would end? This is from Plain Truth, March 1983. At the end of the church age, in 6,000 years from Adam, Christ would return to the earth as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, ruling all nations. So we know that the very end of the church age did not come decades ago in the 20th century, like some have said. And so here's something Herbert Armstrong taught on June 24th, 1985. So about 6 months before he died. He said, the rapidly growing work of the fledgling Philadelphia era required my full time. This present era officially began in October of 1933. By 1978, we went down to about 50 stations weekly. In that period, following my heart failure, I once again took over TV broadcasting. We held it steady. Then I went back to Pasadena. And he says, now at that time, we're on 300 TV stations. Hopefully, shall soon be the largest. He means the largest religious broadcaster in the world. Since beginning of 1985, we've averaged around 13,000 phone responses per program. And by the way, the telecast did become the largest, in the sense it had the highest ratings in the United States for a short period of time after his death. So he didn't think the proclamation was over by June 24th, 1985. Now, another argument that's been raised against the need to proclaim the gospel is a quote from Herbert Armstrong's book, The Mystery of the Ages. It says, also the door was to be opened for this leader and or the Philadelphia era of the church to fulfill Matthew 24:14. He quotes it, and then he says, these prophecies have been definitely fulfilled if you skip a few spaces. So some have said that he felt it was done. That's not true. Now, in that particular Mystery of the Ages quote, which was written before the June quote that I mentioned before, if he thought that the preaching work was done, he would have gone off of all radio and TV stations. But again, he wanted to increase them. And actually, he remained on them until he died. And I want to read something from his last letter. Because if people will believe what his last letter says, it basically rebuts the arguments. Now again, Herbert Armstrong is not the criteria. Jesus and the Bible are. But Herbert Armstrong agreed with Jesus and the Bible on this. But anyway, here's what he said, or in writing. And by the way, I got this letter personally. It was in the mail. I got it, I think, the day he died, which means it was sent out before he died, so it wasn't like it was written after he died. And I personally received a copy. I remember it on that day. Anyway, he wrote, it may be the work that God has given me to do is complete. And at that stage it pretty much was. But not the work of God's church, which will be faithfully doing God's work till Christ, the true head of his church, returns. Remember, brethren, this is not the work of Herbert W. Armstrong. The greatest work lies ahead. Never before in the history of the church has it been possible to reap so great a harvest. It's only been possible through modern technology, beginning with the printing press, radio, television. Each of you must commit yourself to supporting God's work. God's work must push ahead as never before. God is opening up new doors in television. Now I want to talk about a couple of things. With modern technology, we have been able to get people to work with us to get this booklet in more languages than, again, any Church of God literature has ever been put in. And that's being done by the continuing Church of God. We've had the most languages, I think, for probably 7 or 8 years, maybe 10. But for sure now, now I know some places say they have more because they have some kind of Google translator or something on their site. And okay, you can, if someone goes through that process, they may be able to find something, and maybe it's translated okay, maybe it's not. But first of all, it's not hundreds of languages that way, at least not the last time I checked with Google Translator. And secondly, if somebody is searching for information in their own language, they won't find it. from that. But they will with the Continuing Church of God, because we list different languages at our website. If you do this language or that language, let's say Tamil or Sinhalese or whatever it might be, you can find it. And we have literature in your language. Whereas others are just saying, well, if you happen to know English, you happen to run across our site, and you can use our translator and find something. And again, there's nothing wrong with having a translator like that on your site. And again, I'm not saying everybody does that, but I've read it from a few places. But we actually have this in more languages. And this is because of modern technology. And Herbert Armstrong was talking about modern technology. As far as opening new doors in television, Herbert Armstrong's time, it really wasn't possible to get stuff into North Korea. Very well, at least not television or something. But in the Continuing Church of God, we've reached North Korea. We've reached various other, all the nations and territories. And again, being on all the different YouTube, well, several YouTube channels, which we also have in Spanish and in certain African languages, as well as English, as well as non-YouTube platforms like BitChute, Brighteon, Rumble, Dailymotion, Vimeo, and there may be a couple others that's not coming to me. These are new doors in television, and we're going through those. Now, one evangelist who was preaching the gospel in the French language over the radio when Herbert Armstrong was alive was DeBar Pardian. And I asked him about this, if he was supposed to keep doing this, and he said yes. Herbert Armstrong told him to go on to more stations before he died. Not, Herbert Armstrong fulfilled Matthew 24:14, it shouldn't be done. DeBar said no. Herbert Armstrong said the opposite, go on more stations. And we have some literature and other information in the French language. And Herbert Armstrong said he said, regardless of the outcome of my present illness, this is another letter, the work will continue right on to the second coming of Christ. So it's clear that Herbert Armstrong felt that even though he was a leader of the Philadelphia era, that it still had to be done. And we're using various forms of mass communication in the 21st century, plus, by the way, the internet, which was not used for anything really that significant during the time of Herbert Armstrong in terms of proclamation. But there's a group, I won't even mention this group, but they said Matthew 24 prophecy has been fulfilled in its entirety before 1986. And that's simply not true. Again, what does the scripture say? Matthew 24:14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and the end will come. Now this end talking about seems to be about 75 days prior to the start of the Great Tribulation. The end hasn't come yet. On a World Tomorrow program, Herbert Armstrong stated, and this gospel is going around the world. And when it is circulated around this earth and gone around the world, then and not until then, and not after then, shall this end of this age come. So Herbert Armstrong was saying the same thing we've been saying for over a decade in the Continuing Church of God. Matthew 24:14 says, and this gospel of the kingdom we preach to the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. He says it's right then, it's not way after. And Herbert Armstrong's been dead since 1986, so that's way after. We're doing it now. Once we're doing it to Jesus' satisfaction, or the Father's, I don't know which one, maybe both, probably both, then the end will come. They will determine that. Not me, not prior statements from Herbert W. Armstrong. And he also said, getting back to Herbert Armstrong said in 1982, anyway, the whole United States of Europe, when it comes together, will trigger a nuclear World War III. Now, let me tell you what else it's going to do. It's going to end our work. Our work will be through of getting the gospel to the world. That is, very shortly after it goes into force and effect, they'll move in such a way that will end it. And I'll tell you what will happen. You read it in Amos, chapter 8, verse 11. Behold, the days come, says the Lord, that I will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread, but the hearing the word of the Lord. So again, Herbert Armstrong was clear. Not until basically the king of the north rises up and is ready and gets us kicked off of stations or whatever, you're still supposed to be doing that work. Yet, most who were part of the old worldwide Church of God or have come into the Church of God since then don't have that same priority, same zeal. Again, some of them are in work churches that just don't do anything really except try to take care of themselves. And many others are in groups that have some token effort toward it, but it's not priority. If you look at the time that their leaders spend, what they're actually working on, and their budgetary priorities, they're just not there. And in a co-worker letter of November 22nd, 1982, Herbert Armstrong wrote, "Brethren co-workers, the prophesied Great Tribulation, nuclear World War III, will start after the European unification. That means our work of spreading the gospel of the kingdom will be finished." And then he again refers to Amos 8, verses 11 to 12. The famine of the word has not happened yet. It will happen. A lot of things are being set up for it to happen. I read something else today in the news about Elon Musk of Twitter not agreeing to some voluntary compliance with some type of misinformation program that the European Union is putting together, which apparently they're telling him he can back out now, but it becomes effective, I think, the 25th of August in 2023. They're putting more and more things in place in order to be able to censor. Amos 8, 11, and 12 about the coming famine of the word is going to happen. It has not happened yet. Anyway, the proclamation work is not finished. The Philadelphian Proclamation work is part of God's plan. It needs to be done. Part of it is to give a warning to the world about the Great Tribulation, the day of the Lord, so they have an opportunity to respond. Most would think it's unfair if God didn't get out a warning message. Christians show Philadelphia love for others by trying to reach them, as well as to tell them that the only true hope for humanity is not presidential election in the United States, the European Union, various other things going on in the world, but it's the return of Jesus Christ and the establishment of the kingdom of God. Most wouldn't think it's fair to say this proclamation was finished decades ago by Herbert Armstrong before half the people on the earth were even born. Okay? God plans to give some in all nations the opportunity to repent before the start of the Great Tribulation. We know that's going to happen, as you heard me read from Revelation chapter 7, all nations, tongues, tribes. And Dale Schurter, who is a former worldwide Church of God minister, he's deceased, I'm pretty sure, who I've met, he said Herbert Armstrong said the following shortly before he died. "I've come to realize there will be an even greater work to follow, to go again, to prophesy again, to all nations, tongues, and peoples." Revelation 10:11. Before the work of the two witnesses. See, a lot of people say, we don't have to really worry about this. The two witnesses will take care of it. We don't have to do it. God will take care of it. Yeah, God's going to take care of it, all right. But you have to decide if you're going to support God's most faithful work or not. And by the way, if you don't, Jesus talked about the Laodiceans, because they're lukewarm, he'll spew it out of his mouth. If you don't think it should be your priority to support the work, because you think the two witnesses are going to do it, or somehow God's going to do it without your involvement, God will get it done all right. But you may find that you may not even be in the kingdom of God, or if so, not the way you'd like to be. Consider your entire eternity. Scripture is clear. Jesus said everyone will be rewarded according to their works. And it's not just taking care of yourself. Anyway, he says this work is going to, at the end, is going to go out with more power and with a stronger warning message. You say, wait a second, how can you say that? Because you talked about the second temple isn't as glorious as the first one. And you're only on, we're on just under, I think, 24 stations. Maybe it's around 20 stations. I haven't added them all up lately. I know in the U.S. it's 12. And how can that be more power? Because we're going to do something that was prophesied. We're going to do a work in our day That even though people have been told it, they won't believe it. And how it's going to happen is when we start to get the warning message out. And remember, we are currently on, and I hope we will stay on, European Gospel Radio. If we're kicked off, we'll still try to do shortwave or something. We will get media attention when we are identifying the King of the North and saying what he's about to do. Saying he's going to be in league with the Antichrist. Saying that he's fulfilling certain things in Daniel chapter 11. We will get our, and that quote is attributed to Andy Warhol, our 15 minutes of fame. We will get people to be going through our literature, going through our websites, going to the fact that we have the Gospel of the Kingdom in hundreds of languages on the internet. Be a strong warning message, because we will be identifying the King of the North when he is rising up, and he is clearly identifiable. Herbert Armstrong's right about that. Anyway, Herbert Armstrong said it would be for others to do. That means not himself. And that's what we're doing. He said it will be a short work. And I mentioned that. That's Romans 9:27-29. Compared to the longer time to complete the work Herbert Armstrong I was given. It will be cut short. And that's when the Great Tribulation will begin, as well as the work of the two witnesses. Okay. That is what Dale Schroeder said, Herbert Armstrong said, and we are the organization that is doing this and preparing for the short work. I'm unaware of any other Church of God who's been preparing for the short work. Maybe they are. Okay. But we are. And now we're not stopping other people. Other groups can do what they wish. Now, I don't believe any other organization is Philadelphian other than the Continuing Church of God. However, I do believe that there are scattered Philadelphians in various organizations. It is my belief that they will all eventually unite with us, because the Philadelphians are the only ones promised protection in the place in the wilderness, and therefore we'll all get together, and I'm hoping more will come to us prior to the time it's time to flee. Anyway, let me also comment that the last 3 letters sent out by Herbert Armstrong said that the work of publicly proclaiming the gospel was to continue even though it had been proclaimed within every nation. It wasn't enough to God's satisfaction. The end did not come. Now, someone brought up certain comments by Aaron Dean as an excuse to not place the top priority on getting gospel out. Now, I'm in fairly regular communication with Aaron Dean. I talked to him not too long ago, but I didn't talk about this particular point. Here's what Aaron Dean wrote about some of this stuff. People say, well, Aaron Dean wrote Herbert Armstrong's last letter, and therefore it's not really Herbert Armstrong's position. So here's what Aaron wrote about this. Said, the simple answer, I did write the last letter for him, in his style, of course. He was too weak even to dictate. I read it to him, however, and told him it wouldn't go out unless he understood it. He squeezed my hand, added a couple of words, so I knew he got it. It was the truth as I knew it, and I felt we needed a send-off more than I did the work, so hang on till Christ come. He really felt he had done the commission, and the purification of the bride was to be next. He didn't expect the great work to continue. Well, that's what Aaron thought, but again, that's not what he told Dale Schroeder. He expected kind of a gap. I asked him if he could prove from Scripture that part of the work had been done, and he replied no. Because he was getting older, he went in and out of full comprehension. But again, I do believe what Dale Schroeder said, Herbert Armstrong said, was correct. And Aaron Dean also said, I asked Herbert Armstrong in his final works if we should stop preaching the gospel when he died. He said no, because there was no place in Scripture that said when he died that the work was over. And that's what I've tried to say. It really doesn't matter, even if Herbert Armstrong had a different opinion. Scripture is clear. We're supposed to do the work. Now here's something he said. When this European I guess he wrote this Pastor General's report. When this European empire is perfected, the great work God is doing to the church will be completed, finished. So that has not happened yet. The sign he gave is proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom of God, Matthew 24:14. After our work comes the Great Tribulation. The Philadelphia era or succession of God's church will be taken on two wings of a great eagle. Now that's important to put in here because even though the era ended when he died, the succession, the remnant, is going to be taken on two wings of a great eagle. That's not the Laodiceans. The Laodiceans are not promised that protection. All the Philadelphians are. We need to be alert for this. Do not be deceived by the negative sneering of excommunicated ministers. And let's just see here. At least 4 times in The Mystery of Ages, Herbert Armstrong quotes or refers to Matthew 28:19 through 20. And that says we're to go to all the world and preach all things that Jesus commanded. In the Continuing Church of God, by the way, we have done so. I don't know about other groups, but I will say that I've gone through every verse of the Gospels, every verse in the rest of the New Testament that's directly attributed to Jesus, as well as gone through many of the other books of the New Testament, including statements that he did not necessarily say. In Matthew 28:19 to 20, I may as well quote it. We read, Jesus said, "Go therefore, make disciples of all the nations, baptize in the name of the Father and the Son, the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded you. Lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age." So it's to be obvious, Jesus intended the gospel would be proclaimed throughout the world until he returned. He said he's with us until the end of the age. And that's what Herbert Armstrong was saying. The church age ends when Jesus returns. Some have cited John 6:28-29 to dismiss the need to do what Jesus said. But they forget James was inspired to write, "Faith without works is dead." And the work of God is supposed to continue. And some have said, well, Herbert Armstrong was an apostle. We don't have any clear apostles, therefore we shouldn't try. Well, Apostle Paul was an apostle, but he said that Timothy did the proclaiming just like he did. And Timothy was what I would call a prophetic evangelist, which is what I claim to be. And I was, by the way, so anointed, by the way. I have, the first time, hands were laid on me with double portion of God's Spirit on the prophet side. A year before, one of the evangelists that Herbert Armstrong ordained said that I was doing the work of an evangelist. And then several years later, over in Africa, 2 of our leaders, one who had a CG7 background, one who had Global Church of God background, laid hands on me to officially anoint me as a prophetic evangelist, by the way. So I'm not self-appointed, even though everybody seems to think so. And the fact that God moved a minister in my prior organization to ask God to grant me a double portion of his Spirit, I believe was God's intervention. And he seemed to agree with me when we talked about that. Now, in 1984, Herbert Armstrong, Good News Magazine wrote, "Next, when our Great Commission is in God's sight completed, we're to be taken to a place of protection from the Great Tribulation." Herbert Armstrong wrote that in the Good News Magazine in an article called "What Lies Ahead Now?" So Herbert Armstrong said there exactly what I've been saying for the longest time. It's when the Great Commission is completed in God's sight. Not his, not mine, but God's sight. And The Radio Church of God, by the way, back in August of 1959, said the following to the Philadelphians. The angel of Philadelphia, write these things. He is holy, he is true. He's got the key of David. He who opens, no one shuts, shuts, and no one opens. That great door that God has opened to this work is a faculty to go through all facility, to go through all the world and preach the gospel. The door of radio, the door of printing press, plus many other such doors. Okay, we use the internet also. God has set before us an open door no man can shut. God can shut it, and he will shut it when the work is finished and a Philadelphia church goes to a place of safety. The Laodicean church is not to be worthy to escape to a place of safety. When it's too late, they will find the church in Philadelphia has gone to safety. Don't be one who waits around till it's too late. Support the work. Have the right priority. Have the Philadelphian priority to support the work to get the work done. And by the way, Herbert Armstrong also, even though he read it in 1984, he also said it in 1981. When our Great Commission in God's sight is completed, we're to be taken to a place of protection from the Great Tribulation. Okay, again, those who claim that they're so strictly following Herbert Armstrong, and I saw somebody recently who dismissed various churches, including ours, he listed like 10 of them, saying we're not sufficiently faithful to Herbert Armstrong for some reason. And first of all, the criteria is the Bible, not Herbert Armstrong. But as far as Herbert Armstrong was concerned, he said the proclamation had to be done, the commission had to be done until God was satisfied. And then we go to the place of safety. That has not happened yet. It's very, very clear. In John 9:4, Jesus said, I must work the works of him who sent me while it's day, and the night is coming when no one can work. And that's when, as Herbert Armstrong said, as it says in Amos chapter 8, verses 11 to 12, that is when the famine of the word comes. Now, Herbert Armstrong, no, this is from Herman Hoeh. Just as the remnants of the Sardis era of the church existed side by side of the Philadelphia era, we will continue our work to the very end. Okay? Well, we are the remnant, representing the remnant of the Philadelphia era during the Laodicean era. We, the Continuing Church of God, represent the Philadelphian remnant. And again, this was a position of the old Radio Church of God, that there were remnants of Sardis, even though Philadelphia was around. Well, take it to the next step, there will be remnants of Philadelphia, while Laodicea is there. And let's see some other things that this is Herman Hoeh wrote, who I knew. We will continue our work to the very end, when another group will appear, a group not counted worthy to escape the coming tribulation. Another separate work is to arise, made up of begotten individuals who are spiritually lukewarm. Woe to any of us if we take part in such a work. Here is such a work yet to arise because of our preaching, which will say, he's citing Revelation 3, I am rich and increase with goods, have need of nothing. Jesus will reply, as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous, therefore, and repent. It's time to wake up. If you become complacent, lacking the zeal, looking upon a local church as a social club, instead of having your heart in the gospel, you too may find yourself in the church of Laodicea, left to suffer impending horrifying tribulation. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. Now next part I'm going to say is bizarre. We would have a lot more people in the United States and Canada if we had a lot more people in the United States and Canada. What does that mean? Many said they would come with us if we had a church in their area. Close enough. Jesus said the Philadelphians, by the word, would be pillars in the temple of God. A pillar is willing to stand alone. Now, not apart, because the pillars support the work. Okay, so it's not like they're independent. Pillars have to be strong, but be willing to stand alone. And particularly within the United States, the Caribbean, various other parts of the world, in Europe, people have to stand alone or with their spouse or whatever, just a few in different areas. Now, Africa and India, on the other hand, we've got lots of congregations and people can attend. But Herman Hoeh warned back in 1959 that people were going to just be comfortable with their local church, and that would be more of the priority. Again, just because you may have a local church, I'm not saying that's wrong. It's not wrong to have a local church. If your organization does some gospel proclamation, okay, but Jesus wanted or condemned the Laodiceans for a lukewarm work that was not hot. He says you're not hot or cold. Wish you were one, but because you're lukewarm, I'm going to spew out of my mouth. Now I mentioned 1 Corinthians 16:10. Timothy does the work of the Lord as I do. And again, Timothy was a prophetic evangelist. Jesus said also to the Philadelphians, indeed, I've made those the synagogue of Satan, say they're Jews or liar. I'll make them come and worship before your feet to know that I've loved you. We are trashed by all kinds of people out there. Verse 10, Jesus said, Revelation 3 to the Philadelphians, because you kept my command to persevere, I'll keep you from the hour of trial which will come on the whole world to test those who dwell on it. Behold, I'm coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, that no one may take your crown. But many did not hold fast to the priority of the proclamation. He who overcomes, I'll make a pillar in the temple of my God. He'll go out no more. I'll write on the name of my God in the temple of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. But people don't want to hear it. You know the parable of the minas. Jesus gave out these talents. Some didn't do anything with it. Said, look, I'll just give you back. And Jesus said, no, you're supposed to grow. You can read about that in Luke 19. I won't read all that here. Herbert Armstrong also said, this gospel's kingdom shall be preached in the whole world for a witness. Then the end shall come, the end of the age, Matthew 24:14. Then follows a new age, which the reign of Christ will replace Satan. That hasn't happened yet. Now, many of you may recall, if you were a worldwide Church of God, that Loma Armstrong had a dream that had two parts. And I've gone into this in more depth before. But basically, going through this, and I've gone through it repeatedly, the first part of the dream was fulfilled up until the time Herbert W. Armstrong died. But there was a second part of the dream that was not fulfilled then. And we've had this gap. And I call that the transitional period. And now we're in what I'm considering the second part of the dream and part of the work to get done. And this is something that we're working on. Now, Herbert Armstrong felt that her dream was proof that he was supposed to go out and do the gospel. But again, he talked about the first part being fulfilled, but not really the second part. And it was not fulfilled by the old radio or worldwide Church of God, but is being fulfilled by the continuing Church of God. And speaking of dreams, by the way, Loma Armstrong's dream preceded the start of the Philadelphia era. Thiel's dream out of New Zealand, a person I did not know, had a dream about 3 weeks or 4 weeks before the start of the continuing Church of God. So we see a parallel. There's lots of parallels between the first temple and the second temple. Loma Armstrong's dream, although it had two parts, and we're working on doing the second part, and Thiel having a dream. God works through dreams. People dismiss it. The Laodiceans don't accept these dreams. I actually had somebody who was once with us said, can't believe anybody, maybe all these people lied. No, Fahy didn't lie about it. She didn't even know I existed, who I was, until about a month after she had the dream. Someone started to tell her about it. I think that's about when she started to know about it. And the other reality is that we need to prepare for the final phase of the work, and that's what we've been doing in the Continuing Church of God. The late evangelist in my prior organization and I, like 15, 20 years ago, talked about the final phase of the work, let's say at least 15, 16 years ago. No, it was 20 years, anyway, 15, 16 years ago. But he never took steps. He agreed what it was supposed to be. He agreed, by the way, the end times. I'll hold up another couple of books here. It was not just the Church of God versus the Protestants, okay, because he felt, and I felt correctly, that while there'll be some Protestant influence in the end, some church calling itself Catholic is going to be running things to some degree. So, by the way, this book and the next one I'm going to hold up, this one, like the others, are available at ccg.org. He says, he and I agreed that the final phase of the work was going to be involving going against a religion calling itself Catholic. See this book. We put this out. His church has not. Matter of fact, his church has literature that is wrong. So wrong that Catholic scholars can blast it because it's got so many mistakes in their historical accounts. Sadly, some of their leadership knows this and sends it out anyway. That's not preparing for the final phase of the work. Putting out something like this is. Now, does this mean this book that I wrote is perfect? No. Will we probably update it at some point in time? Yes. But as far as the basics, it shows the original Catholic Church, by the way, was the Church of God. And by the way, the top evangelist, when I was in my prior organization, all agreed with me on that. They don't teach it to their people, as far as I know, but they agreed with me on that point. This book explains that the original Catholic Church was the Church of God in Smyrna, because that's the first time the term was used. Could have been, the original one could have been Paul in Ephesus, and John in Ephesus, or Peter in Jerusalem, for that matter. But the first time we see it in the Greek literature, it says the Church of God in Smyrna, led by Polycarp. That's supposed to be a representation of Polycarp of Smyrna here. And the beliefs of the original Catholic Church, including people they claim to be saints, line up with those in the continuing Church of God. We're pointing this out as a powerful witness to any who want to know the truth. This helps prepare our people to be able to instruct many, which is prophesied to happen in Daniel chapter 11, verses roughly 29 to 33 or 34. We have been preparing for the final phase of the work, and we're not finished yet, but we're still doing it. Now, the Philadelphians will be persecuted for proclaiming the gospel. There's a persecution that happens in Daniel chapter 11. And Jesus warned in Matthew 24, verse 9, they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you and will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Well, how can you be hated in all nations if all nations don't know who you are? If you haven't reached people in all languages and whatever, or many languages. But Jesus also warned, whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it. That's Mark 8:35. Leaders of my old church said they were worried that they didn't want to say certain things because they thought it could bring about persecution. But Jesus said we're going to have persecution. As a matter of fact, in Mark 10, Jesus said that we'll have persecutions in this age to come, however, we'll have eternal life. The final phase of the work seemingly consists of finishing, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom to the world as a witness with persecution. And faithful Christians are supposed to be ready to give an answer, as Peter wrote in 1 Peter 3, verse 15. And we're not supposed to be ignorant of Satan's devices, 2 Corinthians 2, verse 11. And part of it is because we in the Continuing Church of God better understand church history, prophecy. Now, I've got another book I'll hold up. Where's a True Christian Church Today? This one's pretty short. Go through this one. Should help you make a decision. Cited Matthew 24:14 before. Right afterwards, verse 15 says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, let him who reads understand. Let those in Judea flee the mountain, not go back down. I just mentioned that there will be persecution. Daniel chapter 11. This is spoken of. That's when the abomination is discussed also. It's also discussed in Daniel 9, 26 and 7. But we're teaching that. We know this is going to happen. We're teaching that's going to happen, and we know it's going to affect us. And we're not supposed to say, oh, okay, it's really not that important, and I'll get to it, I get to it. No, we need to be doing it now. Jesus said in Matthew 24, be ready. Son of Man's coming at an hour you don't expect. Who is a faithful and wise servant? Blessed is the master whom is the servant whom the master finds when he comes so doing. In other words, we're not supposed to put it off until whenever. Jesus said in John 4, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. We're supposed to imitate Jesus. Are you doing that? Jesus said in John 15, verse 16, you didn't choose me, I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit. Oh, I put this down, but let me go ahead back to it. Let's go to Daniel 11. I've referred to this a couple of times, so let's go talk about this. Starting verse 29. I've got a lot of notes, so I had to figure out what to cut out for this sermon. At the appointed time, he shall return, this is the king of the north, and go toward the south. But it won't be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus, now that Cyprus, that is not the word it should be there, it's Kittim, which means western lands, shall come against him. He'll be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. He shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. So we see the king of the north is going to be stopped. Ships from the west, that would be from the United States, by the way, most likely. And you can also see that this involves the Europeans in Numbers 24, verse 24, because the Assyrians are mentioned there for a similar thing. I think both of these things parallel. What am I trying to say? Saying the time is going to come when the Europeans are going to send some ships down to the Middle East. The United States is going to try to stop them from doing something. And instead of getting enraged with the United States, which I'm sure he will be, notice he's enraged against the Holy Covenant. Why? Because we, in the continuing Church of God, or if we change the name, a different name, are going to be proclaiming that that's what he's doing. He's fulfilling that. He'll be enraged because we are going to tip the world off to his plans, which he thinks is so secret and that nobody knows. And we see forces are going to be mustered by him in verse 31. He's going to defile the sanctuary and the fortresses, take away the daily sacrifices, which have to start first, place an abomination of desolation. And this is, we're getting close to time to flee then. Notice verse 32, Daniel 11. People who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. So he's going to find people who were once associated with the Church of God, or even in perhaps some of the less real churches of God, and they're going to turn people in. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out, says great exploits, carry out something. Those who understand will instruct many. And if you're part of the continuing Church of God and you're paying attention, you've been called faithful and chosen, God may use you to instruct many at the end times. Yet, for days, the word many days is not in this part here, they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Yes, we're going to have problems, some of us. And when they fall, they'll be aided with a little help, but many will join them by intrigue. And some of those of understanding will fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it's still the appointed time. Now, it's possible that the short work of Romans 9:28 will temporarily swell the ranks of the Church of God, including some Philadelphians and many Laodiceans and many others who aren't even faithful. Some are going to bear fruit. As far as some things that we're doing, by the way, I'm just looking through a list of things that we've done. We've got magazines, we've got booklets, we make personal appearances, we do radio, we've got all of the YouTube, the video channels. We've got a multimedia page, by the way, that goes into lots of things. We have a Study the Bible course. We have lots of different things, however. Now, no later than March 1st, 2013, I wrote, Fruits, in terms of number of believers, will also apparently become more evident. That type of fruit needs to be produced at all times, especially will be during the latter part of the final phase of the work. A great multitude will respond, Revelation 7, some of whom will have heard at least part of the message prior to the 1260-day rising of the two witnesses. Now, as far as fruits go, and remember, I wrote this in March of 2013. Now, when I wrote this in March of 2013, now let me think about this. How many people did we have in March of 2013 with us? 25 people? Maybe, that's about right. I'd have to sit down and do all the math, but yeah, I think I should have written this out before. But okay, so when I wrote this, we had 25 people, and I said that the numbers were going to go up. We have been the fastest growing Church of God, especially with the former Worldwide Church of God connection, of any church in the 21st century. Church of God in the 21st century. We have about 8,000 congregants around the world. And we also have various last days signs that the New Testament points to. You can read Acts 2 verses 17 to 18, find out that we have them, other groups do not. The old Worldwide Church of God said they would happen at the end time, and we have them. So people should have a zeal. Jesus said you can tell the true from the false prophets by their fruits. We haven't been going out making false prophecies, and the fruits have included growth and restoration of various truths, as well as preparing for the final phase of the work. A lot of truths are restored here. Truths that we're building upon what was from the Philadelphia era and other church eras, based on what the Bible teaches. Now, if people believe all the scriptures, they realize that we need to get the gospel out, and they should follow church governance. Now, if we're going to go to Ephesians chapter 4. Christians were not supposed to be independent. So you might say, look, I know that that group is wrong, and that group is wrong, and that group is wrong. And as far as you guys go, you're spoken about against terribly all the time, so you can't be right. Well, actually, the book of Acts says that the true church was just spoken about terribly, and Jesus said to rejoice when they speak bad about you. But as far as trying to be independent, Ephesians 4:11, and independents don't want to hear this, and he gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints for the work of the ministry. We're supposed to be supporting the work, for edifying the body of Christ, till we all come to unity of faith and knowledge of the Son of God. And we haven't had that happen yet. To a perfect man. That does not happen until after the resurrection, which means he should be doing it now. So we're not tossed to and fro. The whole body, joined, knit together, according to effective working by every part, does its share. Your part may it shouldn't be simply. Your part may be mainly prayer. Maybe encouraging others. We're supposed to you're all supposed to cause growth in the body for the edifying of itself in love. That doesn't mean you're supposed to follow a leader into apostasy. I mentioned James chapter 1. Let's go over there. Because many, even now, are mostly hearers. James 1 verse 22. Be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and is not a doer, he's like a man observing his natural face in the mirror. He observes himself, goes away, immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks in the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, and that's meaning the entire word of God here, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work. Not just for yourself. This one will be blessed in what he does. Hebrews chapter 13 verse 1 says, let brotherly love continue. And if you don't translate the middle part of the Greek, it says, let Philadelphia continue. As far as feeding the flock goes, it's something that needs to be done. We have services online. We have services in person in many other places. We hold Feast of Tabernacles around the world. we're on the radio, we've got literature, we put out magazines, we've got a study the Bible course. We are feeding the flock. We're trying to do things. We've got some youth camps from time to time. And we're working on these things. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11 verse 1, to imitate him as he imitates Christ. Now Jesus said he finished the work his Father gave him to do in John 17 verse 14. But notice what Paul said about himself. 1 Corinthians 9 verse 16. For I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yes, woe is me if I don't preach the gospel. It is a Philadelphian necessity to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom of the world as a witness. Matthew 24:14 is part of the most faithful church at the end time age, is what we're going to be doing, is working on fulfilling that. Now, while all Philadelphians are not called to preach personally, all are supposed to support the work of the most faithful church now. And even if you're not called to preach now, God may actually have you instruct many. Jesus said, for where your treasure is, your heart will be also. If your treasure is only at, okay, I've got to go to only at the closest church, or only with this minister because I trust him, that's not the deal. Jesus said you'll know them by their fruits. Again, the Continuing Church of God has been the fastest growing Church of God, particularly with former WCG people. We have a small amount who were in Worldwide Church of God. I was in the 21st century. Herbert Armstrong wrote that the small remnant of the original true Church of God began to take on a new life as the Philadelphia era. This era of the church was to produce fruit. Now, does the Philadelphia remnant have these fruits? Certainly. And I believe the remnant is now best represented by the Continuing Church of God. And we've reached, according to radio estimates and actual internet data, millions since we formed. And if you add computer impressions on there through our Google campaigns, and we also do some stuff with Microsoft, as well as what's going on with CogWriter and our other websites, we have made over 500 million computer impressions on the computers. That would also include cell phones. Okay? And the Continuing Church of God has been the fastest growing ex-WC church, if you want to call it that, in the 21st century. The fact that the Proclamation priorities were repeatedly confirmed in writing and indeed by Herbert Armstrong shows that he personally did not feel that the priority of preaching the gospel was changed by his death. He also did not fulfill the second part of the Proclamation dream that his wife had, and he said that was a valid dream from God. The Bible teaches that the church must put its priority on proclaiming the gospel. Matthew 24:14, Matthew 28:19 through 20. No matter what out-of-context statements attributed to Herbert Armstrong are raised, the biblical priority to proclaim the gospel remains. Fulfilling Matthew 24:14 is a biblical Philadelphian priority, and we in the Continuing Church of God are doing that. And if you're not with us, pray about it and join us to support the priority, proclaiming the good news of the coming kingdom of God, which will get rid of this world's governments very soon. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God.